Throughout history, the children of Israel have fought many enemies. And while anti-Jewish attitudes, violence towards Jews, and attempts to dominate and or dispossess Jews have existed for thousands of years, it would be imprecise to categorize all of this as anti-Semitism, because anti-Semitism is a relatively modern phenomenon that serves a specific purpose and possesses features that have little relevance to Israel's ancient conflicts. So mere hostility towards Jews, especially when based on an actual national conflict, does not necessarily constitute anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism should be understood as a system of oppression used to perpetuate injustice. For example, people see many Jews in the United States accumulating wealth, moving up in society, and gaining positions of influence. And when they hear Jews complaining about our oppression, they genuinely don't understand what we mean. Anti-Semitism doesn't work the same way other systems of oppression do. Systemic racism creates permanently exploitable groups of workers, people kept in line through institutional discrimination and violence. People who are dependent on low-wage jobs can serve as the shock absorbers for the economic recessions inherent in the current system. Jews were the shock absorbers of Europe's class societies. Anti-Semitism developed as a strategy employed by those in power to deflect blame for systemic injustices. Jews were middle agents, drafted into being the local representatives of a distant ruling class that exploited them while squeezing the lifeblood out of Europe's peasants and workers. According to a theory put forward by Aurora Levins Morales, the whole point of anti-Semitism has been to create a vulnerable buffer group that can be bribed with some privileges and protection into managing the exploitation of others. Jewish populations would often cooperate with the ruling classes of Europe because our own experiences of persecution made us desperate for a sense of security. But when social pressure builds, the buffer groups can be blamed and scapegoated in order to distract those at the bottom from the crimes of those at the top. Peasants who initiated pogroms against their Jewish neighbors generally didn't make it to the nobleman's castle to burn them out and seize the fields. Levins Morales explains this to have been the role of Jews in medieval Europe. The institutionalization of anti-Semitism in the United States has been slightly more complicated and works in exactly the opposite way as anti-black racism. While racism is designed to ensure the failure of the black community in disproportionately high numbers, anti-Semitism grants Jews very visible inclusion and disproportionate success in accumulating wealth and influence. This reinforces anti-Jewish conspiracy theories. Jews are therefore positioned in such a way that enables them to be easily scapegoated by the establishment in the event of a major crisis. But on a smaller scale, this has forced Jews into conflict with other minority communities, who often perceive Jews as beneficiaries of the same institutions they feel oppressed by. And the more vulnerable the Jewish community feels, the more desperate it becomes for a sense of security, which in turn increases its dependency on the power structure. In what way have Zionism and the State of Israel contributed to systemic anti-Semitism? While Zionist leaders collaborated with the British colonial regime, a small group of Jewish radicals launched an armed struggle that, after 9 years of fighting, successfully forced the British Empire to withdraw from Palestine. But in the wake of that success, the Zionist leaders took power, declared a state, and marginalized the freedom fighters so as to obscure their contribution to Israel's independence. As the State of Israel was established only a few short years after the Holocaust, the Jewish people still felt incredibly vulnerable. Israel's first Prime Minister, David Ben Gurion, believed our survival to be dependent on connecting our state to a big, powerful nation. This superpower patronage doctrine first sought out a relationship with the Soviet Union, quickly shifted to France, and eventually brought Israel under the control of the United States. And while these relationships offered Israel a sense of security on the international stage, they also required that Israel act according to Western interests in the Semitic region. Natan Yellin Mor, who led the fighters for the freedom of Israel against the British Empire in the 1940s and believed deeply in Semitic solidarity, was disappointed that Israel sided with imperial powers against the Jewish people's most natural allies. Yellin Mor believed the Jewish state should be a revolutionary actor on the international stage that protects the Semitic region from imperialist agendas and sides with the world's oppressed. When Israel teamed up with France and Britain against Egypt in 1956, Yellin Mor and his comrades argued that Israel had allied itself with the wrong side, both in terms of Jewish national interests and in terms of Israel's true identity. And when Israel's labor Zionist government sided with France against the Algerian people, Yellin Mor's group established the Israeli Committee for a Free Algeria. Still traumatized from the exile, Israeli society wasn't ready for Yellin Mor's revolutionary ideas. But now that several decades have passed, and societal shifts have weakened Israel's westernized ruling class and strengthened the sectors of Israel's population more connected to Jewish identity, perhaps the time is right to revisit some of his ideas as a means of combating systemic anti-Semitism on the international stage and ending our conflict with the Palestinians that actually benefits foreign powers at the expense of both our peoples. Jewish liberation today requires Israel to break free from the middle agent oppressor role. Israel must make a conscious decision to stop siding with the oppressors of the world and start siding with the oppressed. The Jewish people's return home to our land and ancient language has been part of a larger process of liberation that also must include a return to the identity and values of our people. The more Jews free ourselves from the inferiority complex and sense of vulnerability that for the most part characterized our exile, the more we'll allow our own identity and values to animate the reborn Jewish state. And the more Hebrew values guide the state of Israel's domestic and foreign policies, the more Israel will become an organic part of the Semitic region and a revolutionary actor able to challenge anti-Semitism and all systems of oppression by shining our light from Jerusalem to the world.